Good evening, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Gessel, and I am the Director of Public Programs at Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco. MoAD is a contemporary art museum, and our exhibitions and programming inspire learning through the global lens of the African diaspora. I want to acknowledge the challenging circumstances that still remain, even as our spaces begin to open up and expand. MoAD stands in solidarity with Black Lives Matter in recognizing and condemning white supremacy and the ongoing systemic violence against Black people. We honor and mourn the senseless murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, Andre Hill, Dante Wright, and Ma'Khia Bryant. We grieve for so many others who have lost their lives at the hands of state-sanctioned violence, including those whose names we do not know. We want to acknowledge that MoAD's commitment to racial justice is ongoing, and as such, we will continue to say their names to hold space and honor these victims. As many of us are settlers, immigrants, or descendants of those forcefully brought to this continent, our institutions were founded upon exclusions and erasures of the indigenous peoples on whose land we are located. With deep respect, MoAD acknowledges that even in virtual space, we reside on unceded native lands, and thank the Ramaytush and Chochenyo Ohlone peoples of the Bay Area who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. I welcome you this evening to the program series African Diaspora Film Club, occurring monthly with Cornelius Moore, who is the co-director of California Newsreel, the 52-year-old social issue nonprofit film distribution and production company. He is also an independent film curator specializing in works from and about the Black world. Modeled after a book club, we expect that you will have already viewed the film when you join us for the discussion. If you haven't already seen the film, please stick around. We just can't guarantee that we won't have any spoilers. I want to thank Black Public Media for co-sponsoring this series. Today we'll discuss the feature documentary Through the Night, and we are thrilled to have joining us for the discussion the director and producer, Loyda Limbal. Loyda Limbal is an Afro-Dominican filmmaker and DJ interested in the creation of art that is nuanced and revelatory for communities of color. She's the Senior Vice President of Programs at Firelight Media. Limbal's film Through the Night is a New York Times Critics' Pick and was selected for a world premiere at the 2020 Tribeca Film Festival. She's a Sundance Institute Fellow, NAACP Image Award nominee, a Doc NYC Documentary New Leader, Chicken and Egg Award recipient, and a former Ford Foundation Just Films Rockwood Fellow. Additionally, she co-produces and helms the popular Brooklyn monthly #A Party Called Rosie Perez. Limbal received a BA in History from Brown University and is a graduate of the Third World Newsreel's Film and Video Production Training Program. She lives in the Bronx with her 2 children. We'll start the discussion today with Cornelius and Loyda, and we encourage everyone to participate by making comments and submitting questions through the Q&A box. And finally, please take a moment to type where you're joining us from in the chat. We love finding the diaspora in our audience. So thank you, and please help me welcome Cornelius and Loyda.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Loyda, thank you so much for coming and being part of this. And I love your film since I saw it at Black Star last year. And I'm so thrilled that I get a chance to talk to you about it.
Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you all.
Sure. Well, I think I'll start this way. For all the people who've seen the film, because like me, I'm going to assume that they came to deeply care about the people in the film. And so I want to know how Nunu and Patrick are doing in their business, and some of the other folks who were in the film, how they fare through this very unique time.
Nunu and Patrick are safe. They are doing well. They have remained open this entire time. They did not close their doors at any point, primarily because they recognize that the vast majority of the parents who rely on them for care are essential workers. And so early on, they made the decision of, sort of dealing with the fear and keeping their doors open to support essential working families. They have been through the ringer. You can imagine, if they were already standing in the gap for working families before the pandemic, in the pandemic, that meant that they were trying to meet and address so many new needs that families in their community had. So they have truly been through the ringer. But they are well, and they have the same spirit that you see of them in the film, and the unwavering commitment to their families as well.
They're so generous. That's what I left thinking, that they didn't, they would go the extra mile and engage with people, and people loved them because I would see all these photos of people who had families that used to be there and or still remember them. Yes. So yeah.
Yes.
So how did you find them, and then how did you decide to make a film about them?
Yes, I learned about their daycare through an article that they were featured in. And this article, someone shared it in an online mothers group that I'm a part of. And I read the piece, and it was the focus was sort of the economy and labor, and it was highlighting the fact that in the United States, increasingly people have to work more than one job to make ends meet, and that oftentimes those jobs require irregular hours, overnight hours, and given that reality, who then looks after people's children was the sort of question that the article is trying to answer. And in it, they profiled these tots and a few of the parents who were with them at the time. And I remember just kind of sitting there and it completely stopped me in my tracks as I read it, because I was reading, about people that I didn't know, but at the same time, it felt so familiar because my mother worked the night shift while she was raising me and my 3 younger siblings. She was a home health aide, so she was a caregiver herself, raised 4 kids in New York City on minimum wage by herself. And as the oldest of the 4, I was her right hand. So I had, kind of a bird's eye view into how hard it was for her. And so, just sort of being hit in this place, this very kind of emotional place, and becoming enraged that so little has changed. Obviously I'm in my 40s now, so this is 30 plus years later. People and women of color in our communities are still facing the same things that my mother was facing 30 plus years ago, right? So, just kind of feeling angered by that. And then also feeling like these stories are so common in our communities, but we don't really see them anywhere. We don't see a lot of stories about working class Black and Latina women. And so as a filmmaker, that was the genesis. I was like, I want to make this film. We deserve this film. My mother deserves, a film that's about her life. Nunu and Patrick and Marisol and Shanona deserve a film about themselves. So that was the beginning of it all.
Oh, great. Props to you, to your mother, and all the women. My mother was the domestic work, so I can relate too. And the fact that it's probably gotten worse in some way because, during earlier times, maybe we could rely more on family to do it, and the family members are overstretched too, and I think prices have gone up. So yeah, I hear your frustration. So tell us about the process of, because we get a feeling that the film crew was there all the time. So tell us how much you were with them and how long this whole the filming and doing the film took for you to do.
So we made the film in a span of 4 years, and we actually were not there all the time. We shot a total of, I believe it was like 22 days, which for a verité film is pretty modest, you know. People tend to shoot a lot more. Part of the reason that, you know, we made the film in this way is because time perhaps was the thing that was the scarcest for everyone involved. Certainly for everyone in the film, they're all working around the clock. So I was really cognizant of how much of a burden, you know, it was to add anything else onto people's very full plates. And also for myself, because I made the film while working my full-time job at Firelight Media and raising my two little people as a single parent. And so I didn't have a whole lot of time. They didn't have a whole lot of time. So we had to be economical about that, and which meant that actually my initial idea, my initial premise was I was trying to figure out how I could turn my constraints into sort of formal and creative opportunities. And my initial idea was to shoot the film in a 7-day period. So just shoot for 7 days straight and make a film from whatever I got. And the idea was I was gonna shoot from Christmas Eve to New Year's Day. Because obviously, you know, the holidays, if you're working and you have family, it all sort of comes to play, right? Everything comes to a head during that time. That was my idea, so that it would be manageable for me, it would be manageable for them. But because of everyone's very different schedules, it was really hard to make it that concentrated. And so I had to leave that idea. And while that didn't pan out, it still informs my my desire to be really economical and be really deliberate and strategic about what and when and why I was shooting. And so, you know, then the shoot days were determined based on a couple of different factors. One was me coming up with a list of days and times that I knew would be important, or where the themes that I was interested in exploring probably would come to bear. So an example of that was like, I was like, we have to shoot on the first day of school. Because if you have little people, new routines and transitions and everything is chaos, you know? And so I was like, that's important, right? To capture the holidays. I knew was going to be important to capture. So we knew we were going to shoot on Thanksgiving, we were going to shoot on, you know, Christmas. And then the rest was a sort of a combination. Also, I knew that the daycare was going to be the center of the film. And so it was going to be important to shoot during different parts of the day, to shoot for long periods of time, to be able to capture the different routines and rhythms of the space, and the different kind of cast of characters, all the children, and just let that emerge, right? Like to let the daycare emerge as a character itself. And then the other pieces were determined by the conversations I was having with our protagonists, and the relationship, and them sort of filling me in on what was going on in their lives and letting me know when things were coming up, and things like that. So that's, you know, how we sort of negotiated excuse me, the production approach.
So yeah, I want to follow up on those questions, back up a little bit about how did you convince Nunu and Patrick and We Tots to be part of the new film project on them, and how did you I guess basically introduce yourself that they would feel comfortable. And I have a similar question about the the other characters in the film? Why did you, there are a lot of families. Why did you choose them, and how did you approach them about being a part of this?
So with Nuno and Patrick, they were obviously my first point of contact. It's interesting because I read the article. I was like, I want to make a film about this, but I actually did not do anything concrete with the idea besides like think about it for 2 years. So I sat on this for 2 years. And then finally, I got to the point where I was like, this idea is not gonna leave me alone. I obviously have to do something with this. I have to pursue this. And so I cold called the daycare and just introduced myself. I said, this is who I am. This is what I do. This is where I work. I'm interested in proposing, a documentary film to you all. Would you take a meeting with me? And Nunu said, let me talk to my husband and I'll give you a call back. And she called me back 4 days later, asked me to come up for a meeting. And in that first meeting, she agreed. She agreed pretty quickly. And she said to me that that I felt very familiar to her, that she knew that I got it. And she understood why I cared. And she was like, I feel like I could trust you, and she said to me, because I was, very aware of the fact that we were going to be filming with people's children, which is very delicate and, requires perhaps, more care and sensitivity than, other types of films or shoots about other communities, because you have little people, you have minors, and their parents were not going to be around, while we were going to be in the daycare. And so I kept saying to her in that initial conversation, any parameters or any limits or any boundaries, rules, anything that you need to put into place to ensure that you feel safe and comfortable and that everybody else feels safe and comfortable, I assure you we will, comply. Like, don't, just, I want people to feel comfortable, and I want people to feel safe. And I kept saying this to her in that first conversation. The last time that I said it to her, she looked at me, she was like, baby girl, I've been around the block a few times. I'm looking at you, I'm looking in your eyes. I could tell who you are. I'm not worried. So you tell me, where do we start, and let's make it happen. And I was like, okay. Well, and she certainly has been around the block. Like, she deals with a lot of people, So I was like, all right, she feels comfortable. And then with the parents, I have to say, I was the beneficiary of a kind of an extended trust by virtue of who Nunu is to them, how much she means to them, how much she does for them. The fact that she was saying, this is someone I trust, this is something I believe is going to be important for our community, I sort of gained automatic, trust from everyone else. So, it wasn't necessarily trust that I earned, which I was also like aware of, that this was like, I was inheriting trust via Nunu. And then the parents that we picked basically was, Nunu and I talking about what kinds of themes and topics we wanted to explore in the film. And then based on that, she gave me the names of 4 parents that she thought could be good, whose lives and lived experience could speak to the list that we had come up with together. And it ended up being that I met with Marisol and Shanona, who are in the film first. And we also clicked. There was like an immediate rapport. And they also were clear, like they had clear motivations on why they wanted to participate in something like this, which for me was great because, one of my things as a filmmaker, this part of my ethos is I don't ever want to be in a position where I'm convincing or cajoling my folks, because I want to make films about my people. And I don't want to be in a position where I'm like trying to convince anyone. I want to be in collaboration with people that are enthusiastic partners and that have their own reasons and own analysis around why they would want to be part of a documentary film. So then based on that, that's how we ended up with our protagonists.
Mhm. This might be a quick question. Apart from Patrick, it's a world of women, including, you know, maybe a little boy, whose name I'm forgetting right now. But were there ever any men involved in this? I mean, as parents or as people who worked at the center did you considered, or were they there?
Yeah, there's men. They're definitely in the backgrounds because it's not what I was interested in exploring, but they're there. You know, you see them, like there's a bunch of dads at the Thanksgiving Day parade. That you see dads at some of the events at the daycare. So there's certainly fathers involved. It was not what I was interested in exploring. You know, I was coming from this very personal place of trying to understand how mothers and single mothers do what they do when having to navigate racism and sexism and capitalism in the United States, and really wanting to sort of bear witness to that experience and to the interior experience of women. And so that was my kind of main focus. So I didn't consider any of the dads because I wasn't trying to make a film about the dads.
Okay.
But Patrick, Patrick is larger than life, and he's a big part of the story.
Right. So I am very indebted to an article I just read in Documentary magazine by Sonia Childress and Natalie Bullock Brown, and the article is entitled "The Documentary Future: A Call for Accountability," because I mean I'm noticing there's debate about how people making films about these particular communities, there are people who from outside who parachute in and do their story, and they like the story, they're attracted to the story, but yet there's a question about their accountability to the people in the film. So, and I mean, I'm feeling from you that you're not an extractive filmmaker. You're in the community and part of it. So, can you share with people in the audience about your approach to this and how you engage as a filmmaker?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many things that I could say that I was thinking about in the process. One is the piece that I just shared around, as a filmmaker, I don't want to have to convince or sell someone on being a part of a film, because I am making films primarily about folks that have been marginalized, right, and have been historically oppressed and disenfranchised. These are the communities that I come from. And yes, it's important to tell your story, but I know that people want to be able to tell their story on their own terms and not be traumatized in the process of sharing their story. And so the enthusiastic sort of partner who is a collaborator, and that collaboration can span, from a lot of different things. And in my case with Nunu, it was us coming up with lists of themes, of topics, of things that were important to cover. For example, Nunu was like, people think that childcare providers are glorified babysitters. They don't see us as skilled labor, that needs to be respected. So, you need to shoot when we are doing the academic work with the kids, and when we're doing all these different kind of activities. And so I was like, I hear you. All right, we're going to cover the range of your expertise. This is very skilled. expert level work. So, all right, I got you on that. And she also told me her primary motivation for making the film was, in her words, I want people to know what my mothers are up against. Because people are very quick to judge single mothers, and it's sort of a situation of like, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. If you don't work and you're on public assistance, well, then you're a welfare queen and everybody has lots of opinions and judgment about that. But then if you work too much, right, because you have to work too much because all the jobs are underpaid, right, then you're a bad mother because you're not around and somebody else is raising your kids. And she was like, I want people to understand, right, what my mother's up against. So it was like, collaboration on that level, collaboration around protagonists, who I should be speaking with. She was calling me, like the Thanksgiving Day parade. She called me to say, we're gonna march in the Thanksgiving Day parade. I want you to come shoot it because we've taken care of like everybody's kids and we're gonna see everybody out there, And I was like, that's great. We get to establish New Rochelle, so it was like that kind of collaboration. And then also for me, I was very much like the dynamic in that community is it's a very like matrilineal, matriarchal family. Nuno is the mother of everybody. And so I was like always taking my cues from Nuno, and like as I would any of my own elders, it's like my own home training. I applied at the daycare because these are my people. Like they're not my biological family, but Nuno is my people, and so it was that kind of thing. Also being very transparent with them around why I needed to do certain things or why I was proposing certain things at certain moments. Being transparent around what the potential outcome of a film could be, like best case scenario, middle case, worst case scenario, while also explaining to them, I also have no control over how any of this will land, but this is kind of generally what can happen with a film. There was also, for me, I think about consent as something that is ongoing. I don't look at a signed release form as a done deal, right? Because if you are working with people who have never worked on a film, they might say yes to you on day one, but they're saying yes to you without fully understanding what they're signing up for. It's a very opaque, experience. Even, despite my best efforts of explaining, I knew that they didn't know and that they were going to be like surprised. And at some point, maybe somebody changes their mind about something or needs to shift or adapt. And so I was constantly checking in with people, like not taking it as a given that because somebody said yes on day one, that they were still going to be down on day 15. And making that clear to them that they had space, and that for them to change their minds about things, So, there were a lot of things, because for me, it was, and I relate these kinds of things to my crew as well. Like, I know there are filmmakers who might be like on a shoot and say to their DP, for this day to be successful, we need to get these 3 shots. If we don't get these 3 shots, then it's, it's not a successful day, right? For me, it was like people's safety and kind of comfort level is first and foremost. Like, I don't want to ever, compromise that. And I don't want to compromise the relationships for the sake of a shot or a scene or whatever, because also as a filmmaker, I am building relationships with people, and I feel personally accountable to the people that I am building these relationships to. I expect that Nunu and Marisol and Shanona and I will be in each other's lives, for the rest of our lives, because what they have shared with me is like that significant, and so, yeah, there's lots of different kinds of things that I was thinking about again, like for me, it would have been a complete failure to have ended up with a great film, but with like jacked up relationships with the people in it, because I made the film for the people in it,
Well, thank you for asking that answering that question, because that was one of the questions I was going to pose, because it's such an intimate film, but without being disruptive or disrespectful to people's space. And I was curious about how you communicated that to your cinematographers and staff. I mean, it's true that you wanted that as part of the whole process. So thank you for that. It's very responsible, and I appreciate that as a viewer. The other thing I'd say, when I was watching it the first time, and the second time I knew, but the first time I was just so nervous. I had this lump in my throat. These people were so wonderful, and I going to care about them. So there's all this tension in the film, and the way you edited and everything, because I knew, given people's lives and people on the on the edge, something gonna happen to somebody. Something like Nunu or Pop or or the families, and I'm going to commend you for that. Whatever it was that you did to heighten that kind of tension, it worked on me. It was very successful. So I get on. You guys see this movie, like you really will feel for the people and identify. Especially if you have that background. So.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that. Well, one, I want to say that in terms of the crew and our DP, the intimacy. And so I'm talking about what my values were, what I was communicating to my team of collaborators. But I also worked with, and I was blessed to be able to pull together a team of collaborators that shared these values. Like, so I could say something and they got it. There was a shorthand. The entire crew, with the exception of our composer, everyone that worked on the film was a woman of color. Our composer is a brother. He's a Black man. So everybody was a person of color that worked on the film. And everyone had a personal point of connection to the story. So Malika Zuhali Warao, who is the editor on the film and my main collaborator, because she and I worked together the whole time, the whole 4 years, in little bits and little spurts, is a mother. And when we started working on the film, she was a new mother. And so there was a lot there for her, right? From a personal place. Naiti Gamis, our cinematographer, who is like brilliant in every way, but especially I feel like she's like one of the best verité shooters working in documentary right now. Is from Miami, grew up working class, her mother having to like take her along to all kinds of jobs, and all kinds of things, and working all kinds of hours. So like everybody had, a stake in it, and so the intimacy and the kind of the intimacy without the disruption, that is that was achieved because of who the people working on the film overall were. And so I just want to give them their props and remember those names: Naiti Gamas, Malika Zuhali Warao. Everybody really was just like amazing to work with. And the piece that you just said about the tension, and it's interesting that you say that, because it's not something I've heard a lot of people say. And while I was working on the film, I remember getting feedback from people who wanted more. Like they wanted more crisis and they wanted more breakdowns, So like, for example, somebody asked me at one point, like, well, were any of these women like in a situation of domestic violence? Like, is that why they're not with their children's fathers? And you have to include those kinds of things because the film is, it's just like, it's too subtle, they needed more spectacle. They needed more something, right? More violence, which I contend is the result of the conditioning over the last years of all these documentaries about Black and brown people where we're just like being killed and maimed and all the viral videos and all of that stuff, right? Which is not just recent, right? There's a long history of violence against Black bodies being a spectacle in the United States. And so people come to need that. It's almost like that's their only way, their only point of reference when they're looking at a Black body on the screen, and so here were these like women doing very everyday things, wiping down a counter, doing a child's hair, like, and it was like, that's not enough. That's not satisfying my whatever, right? Whatever that need is. So I had people saying things like that, and then they would say, there's not enough tension. And for me, it was precisely what you're talking about. Like, there is so much tension because the way that capitalism works in the United States requires poor folks and working class folks of color to literally walk a tightrope every single day just to survive. Ain't nothing more tense than a tightrope, but it's not a spectacle, right? It's this kind of violence that is constant, like a hum behind and underneath all the bigger spectacles that we register and we talk about. But this thing that's constantly always there, we don't ever talk about. And that for me was the point with the film, or part of the point with the film, was to expose the violence and this brutality that is so everyday that we don't even notice it and we've normalized it, which is the violence of capitalism in the United States,
Thank you. I mean, I didn't.
Well, thank you because, yeah, because you share the experience. You don't need the spectacle. You feel the tension, Yeah.
So since we're in this, when you made the film, obviously we weren't in the COVID period, and there's all this talk about essential workers and heroes and all that, and some of it is being pushed forward in legislation, or at least being discussed now. What do you think? And how do you hope this film will have an impact on that conversation?
Yes. So one is that I think I have conflicting feelings about the conversation. On the one hand, I do think my hopeful self is like, we are at a tipping point because the pandemic made so many things collapse and it affected so many more people than these things normally impact, that creates an opportunity, right? For narrative change, which then is like about our understanding, our conversation as a country, our analysis, like all of these things can be deepened and improved in order to then lead to, actual concrete systemic change. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, I feel very conflicted because I think that, sometimes the essential worker thing is another way to kind of, it's like it's an empty gesture. You kind of put people up on a pedestal, you call them heroes, say thank you for your sacrifice. But then you still treat them as if they're disposable, and you treat them as if they're like, two-dimensional, they're flat, and they're being talked about, but they're still not being fully seen. They're not full complex human beings. They're statistics, it's like this faceless mass of Black and brown people who died during the pandemic and who have been the essential workers, right? We're just like this big blob. And so that's, the more sort of cynical part of me is like, I don't know, right? Because if you can't fully see people and you don't fully care about them, and then, any legislation that passes will still leave the most vulnerable and most marginalized behind. So I kind of oscillate and go between that. Luckily for me, before I was in film, I worked in community organizing. And that's the part of me that is like, okay, whatever you feel, there's still an opportunity, and the material conditions of our people really matter. So you got to do whatever you can with this film to support the work that people are doing on the ground. And that for us has meant partnering with a lot of different national and local organizations working on these issues. And there is a lot of legislation being passed. Actually, in New York, I'm happy to report, we worked with a few partners to organize 2 screenings for legislators in New York State. And they have since passed what everyone is calling the most kind of significant legislation in terms of, for the benefit of children in recent history. So there's a lot more money for providers to stabilize childcare providers, childcare scholarships for essential workers, lots of different things. And both the assemblyman that we worked with and a few of the sort of grassroots organizations said that the film helped people get it. And to kind of make all the words and statistics land. And so we're doing, we're trying to do whatever we can and replicate that as much as possible, because there is a lot of legislation, sort of on the table being considered at local level, state levels, and federal level as well.
So in the meantime, even though it's been put in the chat, but I want to hear you talk about the fundraising that you have come out associated with the film for the people who are in a situation like in these tots and the caregivers.
Yeah. So right, we're trying to pass legislation. That's great. New York did some. I hope many other states do. And we don't know if that money will ever reach our people on the ground or when it will reach our people on the ground. So at the same time, we as a team and with the protagonists, leaned into the, in the spirit of mutual aid, we launched a fundraiser last year for childcare providers that have been caring for the children of essential workers, but are really struggling, because basically childcare providers always have operated on a very thin margin. And so that means that then you don't have like the bandwidth to sort of bounce back when something like this happens, and everyone's financial models have collapsed. But a lot of providers have made the decision to stay open so that they could take care of their families who need them, right? So that they could go out and work in the supermarkets or in the hospitals or whatever. And the money and aid and things is not reaching them, or it's not reaching them quickly enough, or it comes with so many strings attached that they can't use the money how it needs to be used, because policymakers don't really know what people need on the ground, And so, yes, so we launched the Essential Care Fund, and that is still open. Would definitely encourage everyone, if they can, to donate. And if you cannot donate, you can certainly help us spread the word. The information is on our website, and the fundraiser closes on June 9th, the same day that the last day of streaming on PBS for the film.
So the last day of streaming is, and what is it also, what is the address of the website?
So the address to the website is just throughthenightfilm.com. And the last day of free streaming on PBS for Through the Night is June 9th. So 3 more dates.
Okay, and then after that, it's on Amazon.
And after that, after that, it will be available on Amazon Prime. So it will be, available. It just won't be free anymore.
Okay. So I want to go to some of the questions. There have been a few. Loira, your work is phenomenal. Can you talk about yourself as an artist? How you get down, your style, what you draw from, some things you learned from this last expression that you want to incorporate moving forward. So I'm just reading that.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
thank you for the compliment. I appreciate it. Where do I draw from? For through the night, I feel like I was really inspired by a couple of films, some photography work, some literature as well. And I think like I was kind of like having an internal conversation with these works. So some examples are The Tiniest Place by Tatiana Hueso. Tatiana is a Mexican Salvadoran filmmaker based in Mexico, and like one of my favorite all-time documentary filmmakers. And The Tiniest Place is one of my all-time favorite films. I was also thinking about Motherland by Ramona Diaz. Camera Person by Kirsten Johnson also really impacted me. There's a French film called To Be and To Have, which is about it's all verité, and it's about like a one-room schoolhouse in a rural town in France. That was a film that also, I think I was in conversation with, like as I was thinking about how I wanted to make my film. Those are some of the films. Then in terms of, also I would say Daughters of the Dust by Julie Dash, and Losing Ground by Kathleen Collins. Particularly, I feel like their work was in my head, like on a loop. And it's a lot of also like Toni Morrison's work and Carrie Mae Weems's work of like people that have come before me who have insisted on like making films about the interior lives of Black women and have made different kinds of films. And I feel like they were giving me permission to make a film that was subtle and that wasn't the spectacle that people were looking for. It wasn't the statistics or the explanations that sometimes people were requesting of me. I was like, no, I'm making this film for us. Everybody else will get it and they could enjoy it, but I'm making, my point of departure is us. And so for us, we don't need statistics. We don't need scholars, and we certainly don't need to see ourselves being brutalized or being harmed. We certainly don't need to be re-traumatized by this film. There's enough other stuff out there doing that. So I was like, no, and their work was like, every time I was coming up against that with a funder or with, someone or whatever, their work was like, no, you got our permission, you have our blessing, at least in my head, So those are some of the kinds of work, and universes, like Carrie Mae Weems's Kitchen Table series. It's just so intimate. And then I'm super inspired by the Bronx. Like I'm super inspired by my folks, my community. Like I literally love to people watch, and I'll get ideas and inspiration, and like I'll jot little notes to myself in my phone. And so that's like a lot of my process is like hodgepodge, because I do have these two little kids. So I feel like I'm always on the go. And it's like, if I get an idea, if I get, some question that's like burning, I'll just jot it down wherever I can. And then like, if I have a moment, after the kids have gone to sleep or before they wake up, I'll revisit the thing, and try to like build on it.
But that you answered one of the questions was like, how do you carve out a space to do your work?
Yeah, like that. It's funny because I was for maybe like the first 2 years of working on the film, I found myself like feeling a lot of resentment, and like I was like a little bit bitter. It's like I was salty, and I was like, why am I so salty? And I realized about 2 years into the process that I was salty because I really was yearning for the like idyllic artist experience where you're like in a cabin in the woods by a babbling brook and you have all this time and space to think and to create, right? And I really wanted that. And I didn't have it. And I realized I was like sabotaging myself a little bit because I was not working, you know, trying to like hold off until I had like the ideal creative, you know, conditions. And then, you know, once I realized that, I was like, okay, you're like 2 years in, you have made a commitment to all these people. This is not your reality. You're not a single person. You got mad responsibility. Like, you can't go off for 3 months to no residency, nowhere. Like, that's not gonna happen for you. So what are you gonna do? And then that's where like it kind of switched for me. And I was like, I have to make this fit. And you know, we incorporated the company to make the film, and we call it Third Shift Media, because I do feel like I made the film on my third shift, you know.
Well, you should have a place like that to chill and create.
I know, maybe when they're like older, you know, maybe when they're teenagers and they can fend for themselves, but they're 8 and 10, they're little still.
Yeah. That, by the way, the question, one of those questions was from Eli Jacobs Fonto. So with
Eli
us
was teaching my kids how to surf in Puerto Rico.
Okay.
He's not only a fabulous filmmaker, he is also a surfer and a great teacher.
Oh, great. All right. So one person says, wonderful film. What is your educational background? How did you decide to be a filmmaker?
I studied history in college. I went to Brown, and at Brown, well, a couple things in terms of how I decided to, you know, make films. One, my first kind of really formative memory with documentary films was as a teenager myself. I was part of a youth organizing program at a place called The Point in the South Bronx. And I was a participant in this program. I was maybe like 16, 17. And they screened the entire Eyes on the Prize series for us. And I remember so many things coming together for me around so many experiences that I had and questions that I had about why things were the way that they were in my community that no one had ever answered for me. And watching Eyes on the Prize was like this moment of like, oh, this is why, you know, and this is what people have done in response to, you know, the why, and then feeling like, and this is what documentaries are, and this is what documentaries do. So I was like, you know, I feel like that was probably the first moment. I didn't know then that I was gonna make films, but I remember that being like something that really stood out to me. And then my senior year in college, I took a course with Aisha Rahman, Yoruba Richan's mother. May she rest in peace. She taught a class called Third World Women's Cinema, which was like mind-blowing. I was watching films by, you know, women from all over the global South and Black women in the United States, and my mind was completely blown. And it was both documentary and narrative films. And that was another moment of being like, myself being very transformed by film, you know? And then and then fast forward that same year, I started working on a film just because it was something I really wanted to do. I worked on a film with a friend, V Bravo. We ended up co-directing a documentary called Estilo Hip Hop, which was about hip hop as a form of resistance in Brazil, Chile, and Cuba. And then in that process, I was like, okay, this is it for me. I'm in love with this. I came back to New York and signed up for the class at the Third World Newsreel, studied under Herman Liu. May he also rest in peace. We've lost so many people. And yeah, and that's how I ended up in film. I didn't study, I didn't go to film school, but it was these kind of key moments.
Through experience.
Through experience, and through these amazing mentors also, you know, it's like somebody, you know, exposing me to these works at pretty young ages.
You mentioned Kathleen Collins, and I think Losing Ground is being streamed through the Pacific Film Archive
Wow.
for the next month or so. So people could go to, Pacific
Yes,
Film Archive
watch
Universe.
it.
Yes, watch it. It is
Watch
good.
it. And also, there's a master class that she did at Howard that the whole class is available on Vimeo. You can just like type in Kathleen Collins on Vimeo Howard, and this is like her talking about her work. It's that I also watched that video, I don't know how many times while I was making through the night too. I feel like that should be required viewing, certainly for all filmmakers of color, but probably for everybody.
Great, that's a great resource. Thank you for that. There was a question about what kind of reception and support have you had from national child care advocates like the National Association for the Education of Young Children and the National Association of Family Child Care Providers? Was it what you expected?
Yes, we have been in partnership and in conversation with many different organizations across the country. Our primary partners have been, in terms of on the national level, have been the National Women's Law Center, who are working on a huge federal bill. I think it's under the moniker of Care Can't Wait. The National Domestic Workers Alliance, Caring Across Generations, and a few others. And then we have worked with other kind of associations and things like that. But the reception has been good. I think part of the thing with the film is that the kind of the intimacy and the subtlety also makes it very accessible. People kind of come into it thinking it's like relatively like safe, and feel good and whatever. And then they invite me to speak and I'm like, capitalism, genocide, abolition. And it's like, it's my gotcha moment to people. But it works, because no one is saying capitalism and genocide and abolition in the film, right? Like it really is just a portrait of everyday life as it is, which is it's hard to argue against,
Right on. Okay. Before I let you go, you were also a DJ, and when Elizabeth gave her intro, there's something about hashtag Rosie Perez.
Yeah, we do a party in New York for the last 5 years, which is a party called Rosie Perez. And I do it with 2 other friends of mine who are DJs. And it started as a way to celebrate the kind of really specific diversity of New York City and like low-income communities, in the hood, quote unquote, which is you have African-American folks, you have Afro-Caribbean folks, you have Latino folks, many of whom are also Black and are also Caribbean. And there's a way in which, a lot of conversations and spaces don't necessarily recognize all those intersections. But for us, it's very much like what makes New York City, New York City. From everything from like hip hop, on down, like these are creations that exist because our communities live side by side, very much a diasporic experience. So the party is an homage to that, in our communities. And we felt like Rosie Perez was probably, we don't have a lot of icons, but she was like the perfect icon, to represent that.
Great. Thank you for explaining that. That sounds fun.
It is. It's a good time.
I don't think there are any more questions, so I'm going to thank you, Loira, for being with us, for making your film, and I'm wishing you all the best in your future work that you're doing, because I'm sure it's going to be dynamic, just like this was.
Thank you so much, Cornelius, and thank you again for the invitation, Elizabeth, Cornelius, everyone involved. Really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you
Hey,
so
Elizabeth.
much. Thank you, both of you, Loira and Cornelius, for that fabulous conversation and for the incredible work that you do, Loira. I look forward to watching many more things that you make. So I hope everybody enjoyed this program. If you could let us know your feedback by filling out the virtual program survey. I put a link to it in the chat, and it should also pop up when you close this Zoom. And I want to let you know about our program next month. We're going to be discussing the documentary Neutral Ground, which is a film about New Orleans' fight over monuments and America's troubled romance with the lost cause. So unfortunately, always a timely conversation. And we'll be joined by the director, CJ Hunt. That will be Sunday, July 18th, and there'll soon be information about it up on our website. And of course, we definitely want to thank Black Public Media for supporting this program. Please check out Afropop, the Ultimate Cultural Exchange. I put the link in the chat for that as well. And continue coming to MoAD's online programs and supporting MoAD as well. Thank you all very much, and have a lovely rest of your Sunday evening.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.